Hello guys and gals, welcome back to another episode of Haunted Gaming. This time we take a look at another Metroid creepypasta, called Metroid Deception. This creepypasta begins with the player telling us that their favorite game series is Metroid, and they played all the games up until Metroid Prime. The player waited anxiously for the game to release, and finally once that day came, the player rushed to the nearest video game store. As soon as school had concluded, the store was called Mitch's Game Warehouse, and all the kids knew and loved Mitch. The player asked Mitch if the game was in stock, but Mitch said no, but still checked his stock after noticing the player was considerably sad. Mitch came back with the copy, the last copy he had, as well as the Samus figurine. The player obtained the copy and received the figurine for free, since Mitch knew the player was a hardcore Metroid fan. The player played around with the figurine for a bit and saw that he or she could move the visor up and down to reveal Samus's eyes, and for a bit thought they looked kind of odd and creepy, but decided to ignore it once the player reached home. The player put the game into the GameCube and noticed the figurine also could connect to the controller ports on the GameCube. The player connected it to the second controller port. The player took a look at the game case and noticed some weird cover art as well, with the words Deception scribbled on it under the word Prime. Again, the player didn't care, as all he or she did was want to play the game. The player booted the game up but heard a loud screeching noise and turned the game off, wondering what that noise even was. The player booted the game back up once more and noticed the GameCube logo didn't even bounce like normal, and instead went straight to the Metroid Prime menu. The player saw that there were 3 save files like normal. The first 2 said New Game and the last one said New Horror. The player was excited but also nervous and wondered if it were even normal. The player was curious and chose New Horror, and the game started normally with Samus jumping out of her, ship onto the space pirate base. The player noticed Samus didn't even have her arm cannon and just assumed that it would be given later in the game. The player walked inside the space pirate base and saw that there were 5 Metroids, and a cutscene began to play. The Metroids attached to Samus, and Samus began screaming as if she were being ripped to shreds. The Metroids then decapitated her violently and grabbed her head, and just started levitating around her. The game over screen came up and Samus in a high-pitched scream was heard again. The player began screaming and booted the game back up to try New Horror once more. And the player respawned at the same point that Samus had died, except that there were no more Metroids. The player checked a nearby pirate log where a space pirate talked about looking at their comrade dying and choking on their own blood, while he himself was being ripped to shreds, hoping that any other space pirate would come across and read the message to pass it on. The player noticed that some space pirates wouldn't even attack, and only whimpered at Samus' sight. They groaned and cried as well, the text box appearing, stating, "Don't worry, soon enough, you will feel their pain." The player saw a door become unlocked and went through it, only to trigger a cutscene. The cutscene showed Samus scanning the door, and as soon as she was done, a door beneath her opened, and she fell into a vat of Phazon. The vat sealed, and Samus was trying to break out, desperately screaming louder and louder, and began to bang her head, eventually disintegrating into nothing. Finally, something fell out of the player's TV. It was a figurine. The player unplugged it and lifted the visor to see there was nothing behind it. The figurine fell apart and the game over screen came up as screaming was heard. The player took the disc out and just broke it and threw the figurine in the oven. The player asked his friends about this, if it even happened in their copies of the game, and they all said they never saw anything like this. The player received some psychological help, but can sometimes still hear Samus screaming in their dreams. The player vowed never to touch another Metroid game, as long as they live. Well, this is leaps and bounds better than the previous Metroid creepypasta we've done, and it's a pretty good creepypasta on its own as well. For one, it does have cliches, but they're really well included. We see a lot of detail given in them, such as Mitch's game store. The author could have said any store, or even a flea market, or a yard sale, or something like that, like other creepypastas, but by explaining it in depth and giving detail, history, and creating round characters, the player breaks out of what is just a usual cliche. The figurine was also really well included. There wasn't any killing by the figurine, unnecessarily, and it was interesting to see how it would also deteriorate in the end in the same way as Samus did in the video game. And although it could be debated that it is unneeded, it is still an interesting addition, and again breaks from the usual doll figurine cliche a lot of creepypastas do end up going for. I tried looking for some Metroid Prime pre-order bonus to see if something like this actually existed, but couldn't really find anything, so I assume a figurine like this was never even given out. And please tell me in the comments below if something like this actually did exist. In the end, this creepypasta really doesn't do anything significantly unique, but what it does right, and it's genuinely creepy, and it didn't resort to any meaningless crap, against a player, dying by this figurine or anything of that nature, or obtaining the game through eBay, or some individual giving the game for free while yelling, "Don't play it, man, throw it away." No, all in all, I think it's a good creepypasta, and I recommend you all to go check it out. Links are in the description below. This has been another episode of Haunted Gaming, and if you like what you saw, then like, comment, and subscribe. This is me, Mutahar, from Some Ordinary Gamers, and I'm out.